So media, as we know, media is supposed to take a stand against prejudice, against inequality. We expect media to fight against those evils. And yet, what we see is that there is as much prejudice and inequality within media, both the media business and media organizations, as we see in the society at large. One of the fallouts of that is that there are actually very few women voices in media. Step outside the major metro cities and journalism becomes a man's domain. There are entire districts in media without a single professional woman journalist. And I'm sure that such is the case in most South Asian countries. And what happens to women who are in the media, who despite all odds are working full-time in media? What is the treatment that they get? What sort of harassment do they face? Discrimination that they experience within the media organizations. We are very fortunate today that in this panel we have journalists who not only have experienced firsthand some of these issues, some of these problems that we are talking about, but they have also been part of consultations who have prepared reports on the way women journalists are marginalized or have been discriminated against. So I will start with Dilrukshi Nandunbedi. She is a senior journalist and a lawyer, and she has worked with the International Federation of Journalists to work on a report which shows just how women in Sri Lanka has faced and are still facing the kind of problems in workplace that we talk about. She has also worked on women journalists in Myanmar and in South Asia at large. So, Dilrukshi.
Thank you, Swati. Well, first of all, let me thank all the men in this room. Generally, we end up preaching to the converted or people who share the same set of problems wherever we come from. Because if you really talk about representation in newsrooms, media houses, particularly at the decision-making level, from New York Times to the newspaper that I work for in Colombo, the numbers are pretty dismal. So, and this is documented, and I'm making this statement with sufficient evidence to back up. For a long time, we've been talking about this traditional pigeonholing that has been taking place across the world, where women are slotted into various beats. We as working journalists, we are kind of familiar with this. And the immense wage disparities. Some of the countries have worked on this. There is supportive legislation, there are structural changes that have taken place. But the fact of the matter is, we are a little late to arrive. In a sense, where this is an industry that was created by men, and the structures are male dominant for a reason. And I don't think there is a dispute there. But into that space we have come in a little late and slowly made progress in certain places. And this is to be recorded as such. We have made progress. But if you look at women as a whole, we are half of humanity. But in that industry, does this get reflected, whether this industry or something else, any other industry? I don't think that is necessarily reflected. And again, if history records his story, do we also record her story? And journalists, primarily, being storytellers, do we record the stories with the diversity, the perspectives of men, women, and everyone else? Are we inclusive enough? Some of these reports that Swati referred to, I don't want to even go there because you guys know the issues that we're talking about, from wages to discrimination, the entrenchment of discriminatory practices. And in Myanmar, I realized, I just wanted to touch upon Myanmar because for the rest of the South Asia, it might be a little different. I at least met 25 women and all of them said after childbirth they had to stay at home or become freelancers because the industry itself was not they did not welcome the women back. There was so much of pressure, culturally, socially built, that they could not come back. The one thing I want to mention, because I know 3 minutes is all I got, having tried to occupy the traditional media space, and with the advent of technology and the online space, I think women have come out and started expressing themselves differently. The recent trends that we observe and record is the last thought I want to share, because two things. There is a great digital divide between the rural and urban women journalists as well. And secondly, when you come to occupy that space, we also reflect, our industry reflects what we go through as women in societies. If there is general violence against women, then that violence will get expressed in different forms, even in the industry. So the documented bits would show that women who are increasingly getting active online, and there are too many people, even included in this panel, who have had that experience, the kind of online abuse that eventually you face. Because if mainstream did practice discrimination and there was no space for you, and you went into this new alternate space and tried to occupy that, there is trolling, doxing, pictures being lifted off your Facebook, and there is a whole new gamut happening out there, and we don't even know the rules because that cannot be controlled. And we all know it's a challenge, it's a new thing, it's a new face, it's a new platform. But when you use that, where are the answers? Do the original traditional answers that we sought as mainstream practitioners apply, or do we have to look for new responses? Because it's one thing to just be, having to deal with that occasional jibe online, but when it becomes a well-organized campaign against an individual journalist, a blogger, or someone who publicly expresses her opinion using that new medium, then what do you do? There are too many questions, very few responses. So in a way, you're driven out of the traditional media space because it was structured in a different way. And you come into this new space and find you're actually driven out, silenced in a way if you become more active. And the way men and women experience online abuse, or that experience is entirely different.
Right. I think I'll now turn to Najeeba Ayubi. She herself has faced some of the worst kind of threats. I think Najeeba also has spoken to more than 200 Afghan women women journalists, when she, as a part of the South Asian Women's Network, their media committee, she was trying to put together the report for how women journalists are trying to cope. And she herself has faced some of the worst kind of threats. So Najeeba, why don't you tell us about your experience and the experience that you have heard from women journalists in Afghanistan and elsewhere?
Thank you very much. Thank you for organizers for making this opportunity to be together here and talk about women issues in South Asia. First of all, I want to say I'm coming from a country that when we, in the morning, we come out from home, we are not sure if we come back alive to home. It is very difficult. It is not only for women journalists, it is for all population, especially for women that they are working out of home. And this is because of the war that other countries are doing in my country. This war is not ours. Others came to my country and they are doing their war in my country. They are using our land like a laboratory for their war, which has affected a lot Afghan people. Second, I want to tell you, with the support of international community after Taliban, Afghanistan got we, with the support of international community, we established 1800 media. It is registered in Ministry of Information Culture. Among these all media, 2,000 women journalists get involved and the work of journalism in my country. We have 10,000 journalists working in Afghanistan, and 2,000 of them are women. They are journalists, they are media workers, they are media activists, and different other positions. And I think this 2,000 journalists is not enough for covering the voice of 15 million women in Afghanistan. In a conservative society like Afghanistan, whom no woman have the right to talk to all men. In some part of my country, women have no right to talk with a man, not no mahram man. Then it is a big problem, and we need more women to be journalists and cover the voice of Afghan people. This was a success of ours because we had 1,800 media, we had like 100 TV channels and 260 radio channels and a number of print media. But at the same time, we have a lot of problems as well. We have some media established a few years back. There is no woman voice at all. And even they think if women work in their media, it is a shame for them. Still we have this kind of media. We have this different media. We have governmental media, we have Tanzim's media, which is belong to Mujahideen leaders. All of them established their radio stations and a lot of other things, other kind of media. But a few real free media, fortunately we have. Government have no plan for protection of women journalists at all. If they face the sexual harassment, if they face inequality, if they face less income than men, or if they are not appear in the media, government have no policy about this, which is something very strong for advocacy. Last 2 weeks, I was in different provinces of Afghanistan because of consultancy. I got that in big cities there is only few, 2, 3, even 4 people, 4 women, they are covering the issues in the cities. Why? One is because of the security. Second, their families are not allowed them to go out and make report or cover news. And also the other is the society norm and the limitation we have as a religion society in Afghanistan. It is not allowed them to go and make news. Even the people, the women which they are covering the news and reports outside their offices, some people are not looking good to them. And it is somehow insulting them, it is disturbing them. Another issue, when a woman do a lot of effort, it is very less chance for her promotion. Because their colleagues are not allowed them, their colleagues have social life, but women, regarding the issues that I said before, the women have no chance to have social life. But men making friendship, making lobbying and these things, and they are getting the good positions, not women. Which is very important, in my perspective, it is very important if a woman be the leader of media or lead the media or be manager in high level, it's affected on the content as well. Because a woman is very concerned about covering woman content than a man. Because women seeing to it as a process, not a project. And maybe some men see like a project to them. This is also one of the, on the basis of wrong point of view, some people, even the educated people, men, I mean men, they think women are weak and they can't do the things very properly as a man can. This is a kind of understanding, even in our educated men, they are thinking like this, which is fortunate. With all these things, During these 15 years, we had a lot of powerful women journalists in Afghanistan. But unfortunately, a number of them left Afghanistan during 1 year because they were under pressure, because they didn't have protection, because they faced a lot of threats and received a lot of threats. A lot of them left country, and now we have to have more and more. We have to have educated ones. We have to train more to become like them. We need more women journalists because we need 15 million women to have voice or cover their stories. And this is possible. And this is possible if we have a strong foundation, strong organization. As a defender of women journalists' rights in my country, to advocate for them, to take the cases which happen on them under consideration, and do advocacy for them, to they reach to their rights and work more and more. And one point more, we need some unity in the region, all women journalists in the region, and also even in the worldwide, we need some unity to cross hands, to cross fingers, to fight the things which are disturbing us, which are limiting our activities. We have to have this unity, and we have to make this unity. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Najiba. Najiba is the Director General of the Afghan Public Media Group, the Gilead Group. And we were chatting just before this session, and she was telling me that men keep telling her that it's enough to have her, and she always insists that it's not enough to have 1 or 2 women in a position, in a leadership position, that we need more women to lead media organizations. So one thing, as we have been hearing, is that how difficult it is for women to get into journalism and to survive. The next important challenge comes when women who have found a voice in media say something which is perceived as offensive, as objectionable, as non-traditional. One case which has touched everybody in South Asia and beyond very deeply is the case of Qandil Baloch, the young Pakistani woman who was, we call, a social media user, who gave free expression to her sexuality. And not only was she killed for that, but even the journalists who covered her death and honor killings, they get all kinds of threats. And that includes our friend here, Maliha Hamid Siddiqui from Pakistan. She works for the Dawn newspaper. She will tell us what she and her colleagues in Pakistan have faced.
Thank you so much, Swati. Yes, Qandil Baloch was a very, I think was a very important moment in Pakistan's history of feminist movements, especially because, you know, nobody expected someone to use social media in such a way to express her sexuality and challenge societal taboos in such a way. You know, taking further from Dilrukshi about how women are expressing themselves in online media and using social media platforms. She was one very daring woman, I have to say, who challenged that space, and for nearly a year she kept coming up with these Facebook video posts, and everybody, you know, would either text each other or would say, you know, have you been seeing what she's been up to? Interestingly, she was she was trying to be a singer. She was rejected during the audition round, and she used Facebook to say, you know, fine, you reject me, but here is this medium, and I'm going to use it, and I'm going to reach out to hundreds of people. But journalists who covered her, I mean, I debated, and myself included, we didn't know what to make of her. Should we or should we not cover her? Should we or should we not give her space? So the newspaper that I work for, Dawn newspaper, the website journalists, they went ahead and interviewed her. And BBC Urdu, the female journalists, they covered her. I covered her after her death. I analyzed, although I work for an English newspaper, but I analyzed Urdu newspapers and Urdu columnists because they have a mass reach to analyze how were they processing her death and her personality as a whole. And interestingly, I mean, not interestingly, it was very sad, but our women reporters who covered her received threats, sexually explicit messages, which I'm sure men don't get. Also, when I analyzed the Urdu media, I was looking at Urdu columnists because I felt, there was this torrent. In fact, there was like a flood of opinion pieces in English media, and they covered all kinds of aspects, even to the aspect of the failure of the feminist movement, so when I was analyzing the Urdu media, I noticed the fact that the Urdu feminist writers who write in Urdu did not write about Qandil Baloch at all. So I was stunned, I was like, so I reread actually all those pieces, and then I knew two of the regular feminist writers, Kishwar Nahid, who is a poet, and back in the 80s she was at the forefront of the women's rights movement, and Zahida Henna, who's based in Karachi, and I know them. I also cover culture, and I also I read their work very avidly. So I called up Kishwar Nahid, and I asked her, why didn't you write at all about Qandil Baloch? A great humanitarian worker, Abdul Sattar Hidi, had passed away, and she had, spoken, well, why not? So she said because it was not an honor crime, it was an internal issue, and she said, I don't want to write about, I didn't wish to write about. So that was very interesting. So that was also interesting in the fact that, not interesting, I would say it was very telling that the feminist writers in Urdu still did not accept her. There's still a very strong taboo on sexuality, discussing sexuality, because I think for Qandil Baloch, and previously, if you all remember, especially in India, Veena Malik, and she did that nude cover, and she kept insisting, look, that was photoshopped, but nevertheless she challenged it. So women in Pakistan, it's still a very conservative society. Don't look at me, I'm not wearing a dupatta. But you go there, you go in Karachi or in big cities, you see a lot of these burqa clad and niqab clad women. And it's a very conservative society. And here is this woman who's explicitly sexual, and or Veena Malik, saying, okay, look, this is also one way of expressing ourselves. And then to see how feminist writers or feminists are looking at these women who are challenging that very space. So that was interesting, very telling actually. And women reporters, that's your job. You just report, and why should you be threatened? But one of them got, one of them was even threatened with an acid attack. And when I was reading her in-depth interview, she said, it's so easy, you can just buy an acid and just throw, and that's it. And similarly, I didn't write on Qandil Baloch, but last year what I did was I reported on the India-Pakistan 1965 war, because both countries claimed that we won the 65 war, and there was a historian who said something along the lines that, you know, that in that war Pakistan lost badly. Actually, the overall discussion was how history has been rewritten in school curricula. So it was an interesting discussion. I merely reported it. Of course, there's a whole story behind it, but I was trolled on Twitter. And the threats that I remember, I copied those threats because I sent it to my editors to tell them, look, this is the kind of threats I'm getting. And the threat was, you know, okay, where have you sold your honor? And that honor is particularly related to women. So, I'll just end here if you have any further discussions, because maybe if you were interested, I think Qandil Baloch is just a microcosm of a larger problem, which is that how violence towards women is increasing in Pakistan. That is because younger women are wanting and are going ahead and claiming their space in work, employment, marriage, and all the critical decisions of their life. So it has to do with the overall aspect of those changes that are dramatically happening in Pakistan. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Maliha. I think we have touched upon two very important points here. One is how the society reacts when a woman really speaks up and speaks her mind. The second is also how state reacts, how the state tends to either directly or through other ways, indirect ways, tries to suppress that voice. I want to at this point open up the discussion to my audiences. I know we have audiences from participants from many countries in Asia or even outside Asia. So maybe some of you would like to ask a question or share an experience. Tell us how it is, what you might have found.
So you should change Maliha's name.
Yeah, it's written back.
It's a dance.
I can't read it from there, so I'm going to change it for you.
Okay, sure. It has been rewritten on.
Very bad. Why don't you get me a plain piece of paper and I'll finish.
Hello, I am Namita Nagpal from Guru Gobind Singh University, and I am doing my PhD from there. We are basically talking about women in Indian subcontinent, and everyone knows how deeply set patriarchy is, and all the experiences that these ladies shared, we all experience, we all go through these things one way or another. And I believe that it's like ostrich in the sand-like attitude by the male community, that they don't want to realize, they don't want to accept that the other part of the society, this gender, has equal status like them. So whenever, like you gave the example of Qandil Baloch, they felt very threatened inside, and that was the result, that she was murdered, killed by her own family. So it was just that they don't want to accept that they have equal power, equal intelligence, and this thing results in, sidelining the other gender. And I would congratulate Naziba, for we all know what conditions Afghan people are living in, and particularly women, and hats off to you that you are not only living in this stressful conditions, but making all of this problem. Thank you.
Right, anybody else wants to speak? So maybe I can, from our participants who are here, maybe I can raise a question that Despite these problems, women are coming in a larger number every year to media. Some of them are using social media, some are actually working in mainstream media. We do see many more faces, we do hear many more voices than before. And is that really changing? Is that bringing some change somewhere? Nupur, would you like to comment on that? You worked for mainstream media, TV channel for many years.
I think what emerges from what the participants have said, I mean, it's a new area of concern, which is that, first of all, there are very few women journalists still, in terms of ratio of, I mean, as you said, 15 million women and 2,000 journalists, simply not enough to cover them. But then there's also the problem of the flight. I mean, the Afghan women journalists are having to leave the country. The Pakistani women journalists are leaving the country. The Sri Lankan women journalists, like the men, are preferring to live in exile now because of the threats on them. So that is really a huge concern. I mean, I won't even begin to get where we are at this moment, and we could be heading there. And I'm sure Jyoti will support me on that. But, so I think that is really an area of concern. And as you said, of course, the younger generation coming in a different way through the digital media, taking the heat on by being on Twitter. Many of us actually, the senior whatever, have journalists like us, have simply stayed off that medium. I was talking to Ritu Sarin yesterday, who did the Panama Papers investigation, and she was saying, I simply refuse to get on Twitter and Facebook, and then that way you really avoid the kind of trolls I mean, it's a choice, I guess, younger journalists simply will not make, but some of us, have made, and I don't know, I mean, the choices are very difficult, but but of course we need many more to come in to the profession.
Yeah, definitely. Even to share a personal experience, when I was working as a chief reporter for the district bureau of my paper, which had 135 district correspondents in my state of Bengal, and I was actively trying to recruit women as district correspondents, as photographers, and I finally could find only 2. And one of the reasons that most women, even though all the colleges in the small towns are filled up, the media classes are filled up with women students, they somehow think it's too unsafe, too risky, too uncertain a future, too threatening a future to have a career in media. So I think that the general violence, the situation of violence that we have in much of South Asia, much of which actually goes unreported, only the very big ones, I think, big violations are come up in the media, but the numerous small violations which happen every day go unreported. But the absence of women in media is probably one of the manifestations of that continuity of violence. So I know, among those who are organizing platforms for women journalists, these are questions which constantly they have to face. Yeah, did you want to speak? So how do we meet that challenge?
Thank you very much for your presentations, very enlightening. My question is Western-centric, so I apologize for that, but I'd like to understand how your region perceives Western women journalists. Granted, we still struggle for our place within the media, but we have come a little farther, I think, than you have. We don't face the violence that you face. However, there's still that discomfort. My question is, the fact that women in the West have gone as far as they have in the media industry, does that work for or against you when you are trying to make your name and your trade in the industry?
Do we really perceive Western women journalists have done much better than us, number one, and number two, if so, how does that affect us?
Very good recession.
Thank you. Thank you. That's really a difficult one. Yeah, but I would say yes and no. Yes and no because it seems so, because if the indicator is the kind of violence that we talk about, the spaces we seem to be losing, and the kind of experiences we have on a daily basis, then the answer may be yes. But on the other hand, no, because you still have somewhat similar struggles in place of getting into that agenda-setting positions in the industry, and this is documented. I don't need to work elsewhere in the region or in some other continent to know this, and this is a shared concern that finally, even if you come in large numbers, when you come to occupy those decision-making places, and that's where we probably end up, with the percentage being very low, and that is something similar for a lot of other places in the world as well. So I was actually reading up on this NYT research, and it actually documented women's experiences, plus the fact that even this online abuse now that we are starting to talk about it, and how they get trolled and doxxed, again, women in the West, so to speak. And in that sense, no, our experiences are not too different. And somewhat different, but not entirely different.
Yes, please, Jyoti. Jyoti, shall I introduce you? Jyoti Malhotra. She writes on international political affairs, especially concerning South Asia, and she is also the president of South Asian Women in Media, India chapter.
Thank you so much, Swati, and it's great to meet you, Dilrukshi, virtually. We know we've met virtually, but now it's great to see you in person. My name is Jyoti, and I've been a journalist for many years. And thank you for your question about Western women journalists and South Asian women journalists, or sort of. But I think there are a couple of points here, and I have always felt, at least in our part of the world, in South Asia, so journalism and politics are very, very closely related. Well, it's a truism that politics is a reflection of society, right? We know that. But in a sense, look at the women in South Asia who have made it to the top. I'm talking about in politics. In India, today, we have all the political parties in India are headed by women, except for the BJP, but there also you have a couple of senior women. So you have the Congress party, which is Sonia Gandhi, you have Swati's Bengal Chief Minister, Mamata Banerjee. You have all the political parties, except for the BJP, all the political parties are headed by women. Does that mean that there are more gender-centric policies that these women chief ministers and politicians undertake? In Pakistan, you have, you've got Benazir, you have several women who are at the top.
Absolutely.
Sri Lanka, you've had Chandrika, you've had, so I think the point I'm trying to make is that just because as women that we've somehow reached the top, I think at least in our part of the world, so women haven't been able to take that next step of genderizing our social spaces or our political spaces in that sense. And I think as journalists, somehow we tend to fall between all these spaces. As a woman journalist, I will be very conscious of the fact that I'm a woman when you cover sort of insurgencies or conflict situations, because rape is a weapon of violence. It's not, it's a weapon, right, against you. So what do you do as a I'm trying to sort of complete the circle. So in that sense, I think when we look at Western women journalists, look at Hillary Clinton. So you've had a black man as president, but now finally you may have a woman as president. You may or may not. So I think some barriers are some glass ceilings are sort of more complex and more difficult to break. So terms of women journalists in the West, naturally, your standards of living are much higher, but I don't think we envy you. I think we are able to push the envelope in so many ways in our region that maybe you did 20 years ago. So in a sense, we're all much more equal now, I think.
Right. Najiba, Geeta Seshum. Najiba just wants to add something. After that, I am longing to hear from Geeta, who works for The Hoot, which watches the media in the subcontinent, and we are all very avid followers of that website. But we'll hear an interjection from Najiba first.
Actually, I think women journalists, Western women journalists also have a lot to work still. Because on the basis of some study I had, there is 1 per 3 part of journalism in all the world are women. Still, they also need to go to 50-50. 50%, they have to be 50%. Now, maybe they are 30 or 35, like this. But one thing more that I today saw it and wanted to raise this, always when we are talking or working with donors, with some other people from Western or like this, always they are talking about gender equality. Today, I saw many panels, few panels, there was no woman appear. See the things they are asking us to do as a third world country, themselves not applying. That is why this is a concern, and once again I am repeating, Western journalists and Western women also have a lot to work, because the percentage of the women in political positions and also political position and journalism area and also everywhere is very less than men, even in the Western countries as well. Thank you.
Actually, there is a project called Who Speaks, which is being run by the Women's Media Center, which records every month who has spoken on the US presidential election and how little of it is by women. So that's, I think, one measure of the problem that still persists. But Geeta, please.
All right. Thanks, Swati. Now you made me a little nervous by what you said about me. But just to respond to that question you asked, and very differently, really, I think I don't know if that's what you're asking, but there always is a sense of a divide and a difference between reporters who go into other territories. Because we do have the advantage of the class we come from, or the language skills that we may possess, or the fact that we are from urban centers going into rural areas or conflict-prone areas. There's always going to be that divide, and we all reporters everywhere need to break that when we go into the field. So so I think the question that you're asking applies to every single one of us. Whether whether we go from metro cities, big cities, to smaller centers when we have to cover something. But there is a different sense when a Westerner comes, very much like a parachuting journalist into any other country. And so that sensitivity and that sense of empathy is very, very important, whether it's a Western journalist or a journalist from India going from an urban center to a rural spot. So I don't know if that answers your question, but there is a dilemma, there is a tension, and we need to, I think, acknowledge that and work with it. The other thing that I feel we really need to look at is that within South Asia there are very different levels of involvement of women in the media. So if you would have one situation in India, you'd probably have a very, very different situation, as Najeeba has already told us, in Afghanistan and also in Pakistan and in Sri Lanka, or in Bangladesh, where Dilrukshi and I have also been working with the IFJ, and we've done this project with the IFJ on gender. One thread that seems to go across all these countries, and that seems to be the thread of recruitment. At the very entry level, women are not being recruited. Once we make that, once we make an entry, the issue of sexual harassment is very, very real. In newspaper offices, in television stations, in the media. It's something that we don't discuss often enough. The third issue, which is of online abuse, is silencing women. And when Nupur said that, you know, somebody like Ritu Sareen doesn't even want to engage with something like Twitter or Facebook, it's not just ageism. Yeah. It's not just that you belong to a different generation. It's that we're getting, you know, we're leaving that digital space where we need to be, and we need to make ourselves heard as strongly as ever. So if we retreat from that digital space, then we're giving up something. And that's really dangerous. So I'm really worried about what you said about Ritu. So there are these 3-4 areas which I think we need to discuss. And we need to figure out then how we, confront them. Because if we don't, then we're really losing those spaces that we have, that, you know, people like Nupur, people like all of us, and even, you know, somebody like Najeeba, have worked hard, even Jyoti, have worked really hard to be there. And if we lose that space, then the generation that come after us is really going to be suffering.
But I think
And my last point is that which I thought this discussion would be about, is how do women report? Is there any big difference from the way women report on situations? And the second question really, which was in my mind, is what kind of problems do we face when we report? I don't know enough, and I'd really like to.
I have a question, ma'am. We have understood that compared to any
I mean, it's a known fact that compared to any other profession, the risks are way more higher when it comes to journalism. So being a journalism student, my question is that, is it because journalism being an unorganized sector, the threats are more real? And also, besides government taking any policies, do you think as an organization, as a media entity, it's their priority to come up with guidelines for safeguarding women reporters? Because in the recent case of Z News, we have seen how a young reporter, because of a report that she reported, she committed suicide because of the harassment that she has faced. So here we have seen how Z Media sort of did not take the responsibility or authority for that. So what is the scene with that and how it can be rectified?
I think that question got almost buried. So just to connect something that Geeta and Jyoti both raised in response to you, I think it applies to all of us in a way. And also partly answers your question, and I think a number of people in this audience are capable of feeling the rest of it. The fact that we don't necessarily have the systems in place, not being organized, being an industry. For Sri Lanka, it's an industry, not a profession. So then you have inherent problems to begin with. And then recruitment becomes a difficulty because we don't have proactive ways in which we absorb women. So you may have the occasional woman editor, woman in some kind of management position, who might want to encourage women to apply, but then this is not institutional practice. So where some of the disparities happen also would be because we don't have policies in place, policies that promote systems, mechanisms that could first attract women, retain them, promote them, give them, offer them the due wages, equal pay for equal work. In lots of places we know it still does not happen. And despite the regulatory mechanisms we have tried to introduce. And then of course, the last point I want to make is about institutional support. If you wouldn't want to go into a conflict zone to cover the story, all because your fear of being, sexually harassed is so paramount in your mind, then what are the institutional mechanisms that are in place to make a woman, support a woman who would still want to do that assignment and feel safe enough to do that? So that's the next level of discussion. I think we really need to look at it. One answer, because we are raising lots of questions, but do we actually have answers to some of these questions? And I think this session should be also about looking for a few solutions. As I see personally, of course I work with lots of women journalist organizations and have been enriched by many of you over the years. So one thing is about this continuous invisibility. First, in numbers. What do we do institutionally to increase the level of recruitment? So we would need institutional policies. But institutional policies become easy if there were other policies at a national level. And then mechanisms. One of the findings of this IFJ report research was that this was alarming for Sri Lanka. It was alarming for me as a researcher to find 29% of the respondents said that they have either experienced sexual harassment or witnessed or knew someone in the newsroom. Then only it began to dawn on me those little lewd remarks do we we are told to ignore. There is a culture within newsrooms, yeah, and I think this is something we share. And the fact that women are often told, just ignore. But if we had a mechanism to deal with it, where male colleagues were told, this is not okay to go. You have a system where you have a possibility of complaining, and that's probably where your experience would be different because we would still need to create the mechanisms to get there. The last one is about being organized. There is no point, working in silos. I'm just looking after my interests. If you have a problem, it might be better and easier to, collectively look for answers and learn from each other than work alone.
Thank you very much. I think, as Gita said, we need to hire more number of women and put it in our policy. As we have 50% of our colleagues have to be women, and we are doing it. During the hiring, we have to apply some, positive discrimination. If we have the rule, I'm hiring people during this 14, 15 years, and always I'm applying this. If a woman comes with 60% of knowledge, and a man comes with 80% of knowledge, I'm hiring the woman and make capacity building for 20% or 40% more. This is very important. Then we have to, regarding the sexual harassment, we have to make their raise awareness among the young women, because a lot of them don't know what is sexual harassment. A lot of them, when we know sexual harassment is not only the physical touch, it's a lot of other things we can consider as a sexual harassment. We have to make awareness among them to their awareness or their knowledge go up regarding them. And the other thing, we have a lot of laws, a lot of policies, rule regulation, and maybe there is a lot of these kind of policies or rule regulation. But all of them are in some raft or some cupboard or somewhere. We need implementers, and the implementers is not possible to have a good implementer regarding these policies regarding women better than a woman. If you have a woman, I have this experience. If someone do some disturbing or sexual harassment, even very small, I fire the man during 15 minutes. I don't want him to be more 1 minute in my office. This is very important to think about, to do advocacy, to make the scale of leadership and management of the women in media high. Then we see their promotion and see the implementation of good policies and good rule and regulations.
So we are actually running out of time, but I'll ask for some positive discrimination here and take 5 minutes more of your time, because the question that Geeta raised is really one of great importance. That how do women report? Do they really report differently from men? I think Maliha wants to react to that, and after that I think we'll have to wind up with just a few comments.
Yes, I was thinking about that. How do women report? Now, I was a magazine journalist for about 6 years. When I say magazine journalist, and versus now I'm a newspaper journalist, because I got this very apparently in jest, a patronizing attitude, that women are good for magazine journalism. What would you know about daily reporting? Yes, the pressure is immense, it's tremendous, and you have to be out there. But magazine journalism is no cakewalk either. It's incredibly tough. But when I came into the Metro section of Dawn newspaper, which is about 3 years ago, about 3.5, 4 years ago. So I had, so 1, 2, 3, so there were 6 women, 6 of us in a span of 2 years who came into the Metro paper. And earlier there were just 2 of them, and that's also because an eveninger of the newspaper had shut down, so they had to be absorbed. But what I felt, and others also felt, that there was a dramatic change in the kind of reporting, because male journalists, take their positions after the age of 35. They're very comfortable, and they said, we are no longer going to go out in the field. They have the resources, they have the contacts, and they pick up the phone. And yeah, even we do that. It's not that it's that male journalism, but my colleagues, were brilliant. Like a bomb blast has happened, and they were at the hospital. Constant follow-ups, a lot of human interest stories, and the editor himself confessed that the women journalists are far more hardworking, and I felt they were just so hungry to prove themselves. And sometimes we would talk about sexual harassment on a Sunday when we would walk in. There was nobody there, and despite those struggles, they were like, okay, hum kaam kaise karenge? How will we work because we don't want to come across as as cry babies. It's like it's a part of being toughening up your exterior, that no matter what, we will do those stories. I remember a female reporter, so Balochistan, well, thanks to Modi, has also become even more dangerous to talk about. But yeah, our army is very, in the last year or so, has become very, let's put it very plainly, it's very aggressive. You cannot now at all venture into that area. Agencies will come after you, regardless whether you're a man or woman. So 2 years ago, a colleague of mine, she went into the conflict. Nobody was willing, but what she just would not give up. She, any NGO or any human rights organization, that she could get hold of. So she finally got hold of a fact-finding mission of the human rights group, who were willing to take her, and she went, and she was the one who broke the story of how those missing persons, the bodies were being dumped in a well. And she did that story within a couple of hours. She took a photographer and she went along with that team, and I was in constant touch with her. And my editors were literally breathing down my neck, ask her to come back. I said, then why did you send her? If you're so scared, why did you send her? No, because they were getting calls and they were like, okay, no, they found out. I was like, look, kuch nahi ho sakta, all we can do is pray. But I kept thinking, what kind of institutional support is this? There's no insurance. She hasn't told her family. I was so anxious, incredibly anxious, and I was like, oh my God, I hope she comes back and safe and sound, and what kind of support? I've also experienced harassment, and you can't, even if you, apparently you're liberal, secular, supportive editors, when it comes down to the crunch, and when you actually go with them with the problem, they just do not know how to react, and forget even what support they will give, but coming to how women reporters report, I think regardless, they will just go out and find every possible angle. Mostly I find it's human interest angles. And we get these taunts from our very well-meaning male colleagues, male reporters. I'm very good friends with them, but they're always like, why do you work so hard? Why do you have to? You're looking after production of 2 pages, and you report, and you write feature stories, and you sit back and work, and you're on off days you're working. Why do you work so hard? Why don't you just take your salary and go home? It's like, I wish, sometimes I say, I really wish. I really wish I could do that. My back is hurting right now. I haven't been to the salon in so many days. I haven't done shopping. I haven't done any girly things. I really wish, but it's a story for all of mine. I mean, we are disheveled. We look unkempt. We are awful. No, really. But I have a colleague who's, I think the only environmental journalist right now, and who reports on animals with a great passion, And she's a remark. I absolutely admire her because she does not come from that kind of a background one would expect. And my God, officials are scared of her. And she's a very innocuous woman with a dupatta covered head and looks very homely, and but when she's on the phone, she's officially says, I have these documents, and I know that you're smuggling this animal, for this, so what do you have to say to that? And I'd be like, I would be scared of her. So, but I think they have brought a huge difference, and some of the main reporters they have confessed, he said, because of you guys, we have to sometimes get our act together. Not all the time.
So true. And what we also get is, don't you have a family at home? Isn't anybody waiting? Should you not be home?
No, what I get is, Swati, oh, you're single, so you can do that. So I said, no, my mother is waiting for me. My sisters are waiting for me. They want to know when are you going to come for dinner, so please.
Yeah, something you must be deficient. If you don't work too hard, that's because you're a woman. And if you're working too hard, something must be wrong with you. But I think we have actually overshot the time. Seriously, I
think the girl's question was a very important one.
Yeah, the institutional. Do you want to respond to it?
No,
actually, maybe I'll just do it in 1 second, and maybe afterwards we can always talk outside. So, Dilrukshi, we do have this complaints committee law here. It's supposed to be everywhere. It is in most institutions. Women still have to leave after a serious case of sexual harassment, after registering a complaint. I have seen that. First, they're discouraged from lodging a complaint. They said, everybody is adjusting, why can't you adjust? That's a typical line that they get. And even after lodging a complaint, they have had to leave. So, and as for the government, the protection of women is also another way of, keeping them away from assignments and opportunities. So there is also a risk there. So what we really want is the government to have a perfect law and order situation as good as possible. If the police do their job, women are safe. It's when the police and the other law keepers don't do their job, stand back and watch women getting beaten up, being harassed, that's where we face the most problems.
Can I say something?
Yeah, sure.
Mine might be a very narrow perspective because I work for a media organization and the channel producer for the channel. I don't agree with what you're saying. In my company, which NDTV, there is a very strong policy for women harassment. We've got notice boards everywhere saying if anything happens, you've got to tell. And there are people who are anonymous. You can go and tell them. And it's reported. So I don't quite agree with what you're saying, because in my company I know for one it's taken very seriously, and I've not heard of any woman having to leave ever because of
That's good, but there are still places where firstly committees are not in place, and secondly, even if there are, I'm sure there are very good practices, and bad practices, and we just have to ensure, the fight is to ensure that we all get as good as possible, definitely. So that part is okay. So I'll just wrap up by, I think, coming back to the point Geeta raised, and Maliha very eloquently also responded to that. But perhaps we are missing out on one thing, which is that women often, very often women also don't like the idea that because they are women, they are supposed to, report in some ways. They resent that expectation. They say that we are just reporters, why this women reporter thing? But because of that also has consequences. So typically, it's violence on women which hogs the limelight day in and day out, but structural issues of deprivation. For example, women's right on land. In South Asia, agriculture is the mainstay of economy everywhere, but women do not possess land. In India, only about 12% of agricultural land is in the name of women. Do we ever write about that? Is that not the root of all violence? That kind of economic deprivation. Finally, those are the things that even women don't want to write about. So there is a deep point of self-examination that I think men and women both have to do. But since it affects women, somehow I think emotionally women are more linked to such questions. I thank all my panelists for giving their views in this discussion, and of course I thank all the participants for their attention and for their contribution in the discussion. I hope we will continue the discussion. This won't be the end of it. This is just the beginning. Thank you.